Hey guys, it's Heather from Psychology of Superheroes. Today we're checking out Rorschach from the Watchmen graphic novel. He was recommended by KO's Persona. I hope you like this episode. You seem really excited about this character, so I hope you enjoy and that I do him some justice. So we're going to look at a couple of different sources. The first one that I looked at was I actually watched The Watchmen, the director's cut of the movie. I had read the graphic novel before and liked it, but for some reason I had just never watched the movie. So I did, and the first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to Rorschach is his personality. So Rorschach, Walter is his real name. When Walter was a kid at the time of the original group of superheroes called the Minutemen, he was just a kid. So he becomes a part of the second group called the Watchmen. Now originally, Walter or Rorschach is willing to have a partner in his friend Night Owl. He's not so fond of the idea of being part of a group. He does it, but he's very distrustful, so he's not really into the group dynamic. He does, however, attend one of his colleagues, the comedian's funeral, although he stays very much in the background. He's not with everyone else during the services. Even in this group, Rorschach has always kept his identity a secret, even from his partners. I'm not sure if even Night Owl knows his real name. I think he just always refers to him as Rorschach. What's interesting is, in the storyline, eventually, society doesn't want these superheroes. They don't want these masked Avengers. So the others retire, but Rorschach keeps doing the whole superhero thing. He's still taking out criminals, even though everyone else realizes society doesn't really want me doing this. I'm not accepted or encouraged to do this. I'm going to hang up my costume. Rorschach keeps on it. One quote that really describes Rorschach's personality is when Dan says to him in a very agitated sort of way, "You live off people while insulting them, and no one complains because they think you're a goddamn lunatic." And Rorschach responds, instead of aggressively or angrily, he says to Dan, "You are a good friend. I know it can be difficult with me sometimes." It's really funny because Rorschach is he's very judgmental, which we'll get to in a little bit. He's very judgmental. He has a hard and fast way of looking at morality, very black and white. And he'll call people out if they're doing something that to him is immoral. He's very rude, gruff. Like I said, he doesn't really want to be with the group, and very violent as well. But in this one moment where his friend Dan, the Night Owl, says to him, he calls him out on his faults, and even calling him a lunatic, Rorschach doesn't respond in anger. And I just think that that's really interesting. He takes it, and he even admits, "I know it can be difficult with me sometimes." So he obviously has some sort of understanding what I'm doing puts people off, and he's almost apologetic about it, which was surprising to me. When he was growing up, Rorschach's mom, and again we'll go into the backstory of Rorschach in a little while, but as far as what's in the Watchmen movie, his mom calls him a bastard and says that she should have had an abortion. So imagine growing up and your mom telling you that you should have been dead, you should have been killed while you're in the womb, or that she shouldn't have had you in the first place. And growing up with that, I could understand being distrustful of people or being bitter or hardened. At one point, just to give you more of an idea of what Rorschach's personality is, Dan and another superhero, Lori, end up picking him up from jail, and he makes some comments about Dan and Lori sleeping together, unkind comments about them sleeping together, and Lori calls him an asshole, which fair, he was kind of being an asshole, but these people don't have any difficulty pointing out Rorschach's flaws. The thing that defines Rorschach is his mask. So on his face, on his mask, Rorschach has changing ink blot images. We'll talk about the ink blot in a little bit because he actually goes through the test, but his name is named after a psychological test, and his face, his mask, imitates that test. Whenever he beats up criminals, he also leaves behind these ink blot calling cards. He talks about the ink blot test, the Rorschach test, and said that Rorschach says he knows the city's true self. In fact, he is the city's true self. So first of all, with the Rorschach test, when you look at it, it's just these very ambiguous, almost random, but they're symmetrical images. And a psychologist might show these images to someone and ask them, what do you see from this? And interpret their different answers to get some sort of psychological profile from them. So this Rorschach test is called a projection test because you have these very ambiguous, meaningless images, but people project their own thoughts, desires, backgrounds, what have you, onto these meaningless images. And that's how the psychologist is able to get some information from them. It's what the people choose to talk about. So Rorschach says basically that he is the test for the city. So the city looks at Rorschach and says, you know, you're violent, you're a psychopath, you're a lunatic, and comes up with all of these projections. And Rorschach says, no, I am not violent, a psychopath, or a lunatic. You are violent, a psychopath, and a lunatic. So what Rorschach is getting at is that anything that the city wants to call him is just a reflection of what the city, the people, actually is itself. That he is just a mirror for the city. Carl Jung talks about this idea of a persona, and he said that a persona is a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. So Carl Jung said, we put on these personas, these cover-ups of our real personalities, our real selves, and we go out into society and we play this game. We show people what we want them to see, either to impress other people, to get them to like us, what have you, on one hand, and on the other hand, to hide our true selves. We think society doesn't want our true selves, or we're not comfortable with showing our true selves to society. So we give society this different impression. And that impression is not an accurate portrayal of our true selves. And that we do this all the time. Everyone does this a lot of times. It's very seldom are people, according to Carl Jung, living very authentic lives, showing what they show to society being their actual true selves, that we put forth this persona. But with Rorschach, his mask actually lets him be himself, or the self that he wants to be. His face, his physical face, the face of Walter, is the disguise. With the Rorschach mask, he is free from fear, from any type of weakness, physical or moral weakness. He's free from lust. And that's the person that he wants to be. So when he's just Walter, when he just has this face, that's not his true self. When he puts on his superhero mask, the Rorschach mask, that's when he becomes the self that he wants to be. At one point during the movie, he's captured by the police and he's demasked. They take off of his Rorschach mask and he screams, "My face! Give me back my face!" So to Rorschach, this face, this Rorschach persona isn't really a persona. It's not an act. It's his true self. This Walter, this non-Rorschach, is not his true self. Is not who he wants to be. I think it's interesting how it's kind of like an opposite of what Carl Jung was saying. So we could talk about a diagnosis with Rorschach, and I've talked about this idea of antisocial personality disorder or sociopaths in the last episode with Jason Todd, and the DSM does have the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. I'm not going to go so much into the diagnosis, but I do want to talk about how people do believe that Rorschach is a psychopath. The one character, Adrian Veidt, I think is how you say his last name, calls Rorschach a psychopath. He refers to Rorschach as a true sociopath, which is interesting because Veidt is he's also a sociopath. He has no trouble killing off millions of people in order to save billions of people. He does it rather coldly. So for him to call Rorschach a sociopath is it's interesting in my personal opinion. While Rorschach is in jail, he's assessed by a psychologist, and the psychologist says that he can't help Rorschach at all. I guess Rorschach is just too far gone. But while he's in jail, the psychologist literally gives Rorschach a Rorschach ink block test. So he's shown these ambiguous images. So what you're supposed to do with these tests is you see this image and then you say whatever comes to mind first in order for the psychologist to get an accurate portrayal. But obviously, if you have a person who is going by the name Rorschach and has a mask that is an ever morphing images of an ink block test, they probably understand how the test goes. So Rorschach, Walter, is looking at these cards, these ambiguous images, these ink block images, and he does have like a first thought when he's seeing them. He sees one image and he thinks of a dead dog. But he doesn't say, I see a dead dog to a psychologist, because that would trigger some flags. Instead, he says, I see a pretty butterfly. He's shown another card and it reminds him of his mom, that mom who said that he's a bastard, that she should have had him aborted. And instead of saying, this reminds me of my mom, he says flowers. So he's thinking of very traumatic or dark images, but that's not what he's giving the psychologist. I don't want to say he fools the psychologist, because I think the psychologist does know what he's doing, but he's playing the game. He knows not to give these more insightful answers. Instead, he's just giving very superficial, nice answers. He's shown another card and it reminds him of being bullied and even biting off another kid's ear as a kid, and instead he says clouds. So he's playing the game. At another point, he's writing in his journal and he talks about feeling slightly depressed. So that could warrant the idea, okay, does Rorschach have depression? I don't really see any evidence of that. I also think that it would be really normal to feel slightly depressed in this storyline. There's this idea of an impending nuclear attack, that humanity is about to wipe itself out. So if I was in that situation, I too would also feel somewhat depressed or saddened. I don't think that's out of the realm of normal. I don't think it's dysfunctional at all. But Rorschach also writes out, why are so few of us, as in superheroes or masked vigilantes, why are so few of us left active, healthy, and without personality disorders? So rather than giving Rorschach necessarily a diagnosis, I really want to know, I'm interested, is there something about being a superhero in these more gritty storylines? Is there something about putting on that mask, or maybe your persona, or dealing with the darker side of humanity, fighting and dealing with whatever trauma? Is there something about the very nature of being a superhero that would lead one to have a personality disorder? Now, Rorschach says, why are so few of us left active, healthy, and without personality disorders, kind of suggesting that becoming a superhero helped these people develop personality disorders, which by the very nature of a personality disorder, it's the definition of your personality. So if you have a personality disorder after becoming a superhero, you probably had a personality disorder prior to being a superhero. It's a definition of your personality. You don't just randomly or quickly develop a personality disorder. So perhaps becoming a superhero doesn't give someone a personality disorder. That doesn't sound right. But perhaps people in these stories, people with personality disorders, are more likely to become either superheroes or villains. And perhaps Rorschach says personality disorders, but these other people do develop some other kind of emotional, psychotic, or mood disorder. Maybe he's just incorrectly labeling them as personality disorders. So maybe people dealing with these more traumatic situations, this violence, these things that they see, that would make sense if they developed other kind of mental disorders or emotional disorders. That's my question. I'm throwing it out there to you guys. Are superheroes more likely to develop emotional or mood disorders, psychotic disorders? And are people with personality disorders more likely to become superheroes? Would a completely functional person necessarily become a superhero? So I'm throwing that one out there. So let's talk next about Rorschach morality. And there's a lot to talk about with this, because most of what Rorschach says is a judgment of society. He refers to all these liberals, intellectuals, and smooth talkers. So apparently to him, like, being liberal minded politically, or just in general, I guess, being educated and intellectual, these smooth talkers, he doesn't think very highly of them. So we already have that idea, is that he's not about this. He's not about liberal political correctness. And he really also has a thing against sex in general. I think it kind of disgusts him, but especially outside of marriage. He's incredibly judgmental of premarital sex, adultery, and gay people in general. He's also, one of Rorschach's defining characteristics is he's somewhat paranoid. And I say that hesitantly because he has seen the darker side of society. In some sense, he sees nothing good about society. He says, because there is good and evil must be punished. That's his whole reason for continuing to be a superhero, even after everyone else has retired. That there's good and there's evil, and the evil is what needs to be punished. So I guess he does recognize the existence of some good. In order to talk about good and evil, he must recognize that good must somehow exist. You can contact me and find articles, podcasts, and videos on psychologyofsuperheroes.tumblr.com. You can also contact me on Twitter at psychsuperheroes. Please check out my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/psychologyofsuperheroes. I look forward to hearing from you guys. I'll see you next time.